The NBA is in a scoring bubble right now, and this, for a myriad of reasons, is incredible. Namely that, like, as a fan, you know, any game that I tune into, there's like a 90% chance that something awesome is going to happen. Either a team is going to score 150 points, a team will break a franchise record for like threes made in a game, or the most likely outcome, like somebody will score 35, right? I'm going to watch something cool happen. Additionally, like the All-Star game, there are like 12 names more than what there usually is that we're kind of like, wait, what about them? Wait, what about this guy? Because everybody will have like these 6-game spurts where we have to stop everything that we're doing and pay attention to this guy until the next guy starts doing it. This, of course, bleeds over into the MVP conversation, which has got to be the most polarizing it's been in recent years, because you have the voter fatigue factor. That's a separate video. But, like, you look at the MVP and you're like, no, it's actually case closed. We're going to give it to the guy who had 3 40-point games in a 2-night span. And then the other crowd's like, no. We got to give it to the guy who put up 65, 19, and 10. And then this other crowd is like, no. You know what I mean? Like, there's just so much going on, and everybody's having a great time, for the most part. Unless you're Moto Noah. I mean, I'm having fun. Like, it's cool. It's awesome. Like I said, it's a blast. Any game that I'm like, I'm going to lock in for this one, I'm treated. Like, it's beautiful. Here's the thing. I'm going to sound like such a boomer. Like, 10 years ago, you remember when, like, a guy would just, it was like a lifer 9-point on 36% guy. You love that guy. You need that guy on your team. And it's like, of course we're going to move the goalposts as the game evolves. If teams are scoring more points on aggregate than they literally ever have, it's because the players are scoring more on aggregate than they ever have. So, of course, you know, the guy averaging 9 on 36 isn't going to be valued the same way that he would be today when there's a guy averaging 13 on 41. You know what I mean? It's different. But that was just such, like, it's such a, even those guys are technically the same as they was back, as they were back then. It just feels a little bit different, right? And when I really started to think about this and, like, are those, you know, types of players that sort of play on the margins and they do all the intangibles, it's the glue guys, and I always talk about this. I would rather root for the oil that makes the machine run than the machine itself. I think there's just more inherent value in that. So while everybody's figuring out like the hows and the whys of this scoring bubble, why is this going on? Did we go too far eliminating these transition take fouls? No, Adam Silver, please don't take that away. It's literally the best rule change you guys have potentially ever made. While all that's getting settled, I'm just sitting here thinking, like, what's the blueprint for, like, these dudes that have insane staying power in the NBA? Like, the dudes that anytime there's a roster spot open, teams will come calling because it's the caliber player that you need on your team. What does that guy look like? What's his mold? What's that path? And that's what we're here to talk about today, ladies and gentlemen. So all you youngins out there, all you up-and-comers with hoop dreams, I am going to introduce you to the Avery Bradley rules. Now, again, this will act as a blueprint and as a step-by-step guide to have an NBA career that lasts between 5 and 12 years. Let's not waste any more time and jump right into it with rule number 1. Only shoot the ball if you know it's going in. I did add here, parenthetically, for Avery Bradley's sake at least, only on DHOs from the top of the key. So if you're not taking a dribble handoff and you're not at the top of the key, it's probably not the shot for you. And Avery is a funny example because when you think of him, and we're going to get to this part in later in the video, but when you think of Avery Bradley, especially early in his career, all the value is what he brought on the defensive end. But again, we're going to get into that in just a few minutes. So like on the offensive end, like, did you really ever think of Avery Bradley as a three-point shooter? Not really, but like he's a career 37%er. That's pretty awesome. You also think of him as just an off-ball guy. You think of him cutting the baseline, you know, dive into the basket. You think about those dribble handoffs. And you know, when I think about guys who are in the league today that kind of have this same mentality, like Terrence Mann is kind of like that. If you want just a better version, like who's the best version that does all the same stuff? Jeremy Grant. The only difference is, like, most of the time, well, this season when Jeremy Grant shoots the ball, I think it's going in. This season I do. But for the last 2 years, just as a Pistons fan, it was kind of like, I don't know. But Jeremy Grant, if nothing else, fucking loves a good dribble handoff. As promised, let's jump on to rule number 2, which is all that, like, really fun defensive stuff that we like out of certain guys. Just do that. That would be great forever. Perpetually, Avery Bradley. If nothing else, the dude is flying into passing lanes. When he got traded to Detroit, I remember my biggest point was like, now we have a guy who we can send out there and be like, this is who we're putting on the opposing team's best guard, because that's where all his value was when he first got into the league. And by the time he got traded to Detroit, I think it was like all defensive second, I think is what he got that year. And this part is like, it's almost like an unwritten rule. It's kind of like a sub rule 2. And I'm not trying to sound like Bill Simmons and be like, this guy just goes out here and he just like does stuff. And like, I'm not actually saying anything, but like to him, it makes sense. But like, there's so much value in the NBA in guys who just try. And like, that's it. Dudes who just play really, really hard. So many players have extended the lifespan on their career straight up by like 2 or 3 years, just because that for the 12 minutes that you give them of run on a nightly basis, or sometimes these guys are only getting once a week, it's like, I know this guy's going to play hard. Thanasis Antetokounmpo isn't good at much except playing really, really hard. Another example of a guy who maybe this one is just a little bit better because there is ability in there somewhere. I know there is Stanley Johnson. The Detroit thing didn't work. He goes to Toronto. He kind of starts to carve out a thing in there, and then Nick Nurse hated him. He's out of there. The Lakers is what I mean by this, though, because the Lakers were just signing anybody they could get. If you were a warm body, your knees worked, like you were suiting up. And the Stanley thing ended up really working out for them because the guy just hustles, man. It's an effort thing. And I think that like a lot of dudes would have given up after the Toronto thing. Now, I know that like, of course, these dudes have like legit hoop dreams, and who the fuck am I to say like this guy probably would have given up, but it's the principle of what I'm saying. And I say all of that just to say, you know who did that better than anybody? Yeah, Avery Bradley. Also like Bruce Brown. Now, it's different with Bruce because the offensive stuff has come along with him over the years. Like every single year, marginal at best, he is getting better and better and better. But like, here's the take on that. If he was like a complete zero on offense, I think he'd still be in the league. And I think he would still be doing all of the same things that he does for every single team that he's on, whether it's Detroit, whether it's Brooklyn, whether it's Denver. And I got to tell you something, man. Well, no, because let's do a transition. This brings us beautifully into our final rule of the Avery Bradley rules. Rule number 3, play for as many teams as you want. Most of this isn't real anyways. Just go out there and have fun. Avery Bradley played for like a quarter of the teams in the league, and it's funny because like, I always think Boston. Even though he was a Piston, I will always think Boston with Avery Bradley. And then he gets traded to Detroit, spends like 5 years in Boston. It's the most that he played with any other team. And then after that, it was like 2 years at most, and then people were sick of him. And Detroit kind of started this domino with him because he's spending all his time in Boston, and then he gets shipped to Detroit. And then 30 games into that, he had gotten hurt. He was like pretty decent, and then the injury kind of threw him off. And then the Blake Griffin deal was on the table. So we send over Tobias, Avery Bradley, I think Boban, and they give us Blake, Bryce Johnson, Willie Reed, and then we also gave them a pick that ended up turning into Shea, which turned into Paul George, and that's how that all worked out. But I only say that to say that after that trade happened, so he goes to the Clippers, and then after that, every single year, different team. And every single team he was on, even if it was like Memphis and he only played for like a month in total on the season, he was awesome. He gave them everything they had on the offensive end that year too. But you also think like, I remember as a kid, I always used to think it was like really disrespectful to call somebody a journeyman, because I used to always think like, well, that just means nobody wants them. Like there's not a team that actually wants them in the league. And then you go back like 10 years, and I think it doesn't happen as much these days. So yeah, let's go back 10 years. Jeff Green was like the guy who every single year it was like, this is the filler for whatever trade we're going to make. This is the salary filler that we need. Jeff Green was getting shipped every single year. And I remember people always used to be kind of the same. Like, why does nobody want Uncle Jeff? And it's like, no, it's actually the opposite. where he's so valuable, the role that he plays and this like mold that he is, there's so much value in it that teams all the time are willing to take on Jeff Green. They're like, yeah, hey, this is a good body to have. This is a good veteran presence, and we're going to get some productive minutes out of him every year. And that happened with like Langston Galloway. That happened with like, did it happen with Reggie Bullock? You could throw him in there. Ish Smith was also like a career journeyman. And then I forgot, you were probably like, what the fuck was this guy talking about with the Bruce Brown transition? He never got back to that? Yeah. I remember what that was. My take about Bruce Brown is I think that, like, no shot Denver is his last team. I think Bruce Brown is going to play for like 4 or 5 more teams because I think he's too good, but he's too expendable, right? Like, guys like him don't exist, but they exist. You know what I mean? I'm still waiting for the Boston thing to happen. Bruce Brown is going to Boston someday. It will happen. And then Miami is the other team that I think would be really interesting. And I'm just using what I know about Bruce Brown. And that's how you do it, folks. The Avery Bradley rules are 3 simple lines of code. This one was weird because you probably saw the thumbnail and were like, is he fucking for real with this? And then some of you got this far and were like, some of you didn't. Some people got like 2 minutes in and were like, he's actually doing this Avery Bradley thing. We really like him, man. I was just thinking about him the other night. It was like 3 or 4 in the morning. I was just laying in bed. I couldn't sleep. And I have like this, I just like him.